All right, so Greenland and the U.S., things are heating up there, and we wanted to take a deep dive into all of that because it's been pretty hard to keep up with everything going on up there.
Yeah, a lot happening up north and fast.
Right. And so for this deep dive, we've gathered a whole bunch of news articles and briefings, basically everything we could find from March 2025. And we really want to try to figure out exactly what's going on with this whole U.S. trying to get control of Greenland thing. And
Though they haven't exactly said get control, but definitely a lot of interest.
a lot of interest, yeah. So we want to understand sort of what are the motivations behind all of this, what are the responses looking like, and just kind of synthesize all this information into something that's, a little bit easier to digest.
Exactly right. And I think a good place to start is with these elections that happened in Greenland at the beginning of March 2025. So what really stood out to you about the results there?
Yeah, well, it looks like Prime Minister Mutijid's party and coalition lost some ground, and the center-right Democrat Party actually had some gains.
Right, saw some wins there.
Yeah, and a lot of sources are saying that this could be a sign of growing support for independence from Denmark.
Which would be a huge development.
Yeah, so that's kind of the backdrop to all of this. And then very soon after, we heard President Trump's rather assertive stance.
Assertive, that's one way to put it.
Yeah, in mid-March, he gave this speech to Congress, and he said flat out that the U.S. is going to acquire Greenland.
One way or the other.
One way or the other, yeah. And he later went on to emphasize that the U.S. will go as far as we have to go to get control of Greenland, and that it was absolutely necessary for both national and international security.
It's interesting. He didn't just argue for a U.S. benefit here. He said the world needs us to have Greenland, including Denmark.
Yeah, pretty bold statement. And this isn't the first time that the U.S. has expressed interest in Greenland.
No, we've seen this before, right?
Right. Trump himself looked into this during his first term, and even going back historically, Presidents Andrew Johnson and Harry Truman considered the possibility.
So there's a history here.
Right. So it's not like this is completely out of the blue, but it does seem like a pretty big escalation in recent weeks. And then we saw plans for this visit emerging. Initially, it was going to be Second Lady Usha Vance going to Greenland with one of her sons to visit some cultural sites, and the Vanuatu Kimissersua dog sled race in Sissimudut.
At the invitation of Tom Dance?
Yeah, at the invitation of Tom Dance of American Daybreak, so it just seemed kind of low-key.
Seemed like it, yeah.
But Prime Minister Azade immediately pushed back hard. He called it very aggressive American pressure and a provocation, and even called for international condemnation.
And Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, she said that the pressure was unacceptable.
Yeah, strong words for sure.
Very strong.
And it seems like the U.S. officials were having a tough time finding anyone in Nuuk to host the Second Lady.
It's not a good sign.
No, not a good sign at all. And then things kind of took a turn. Vice President J.D. Vance announced he was joining the trip, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Energy Secretary Chris Wright were added to the delegation, too.
So it became a much higher level visit.
A much higher level visit, and suddenly everything was scaled back. They canceled the visits to Nuuk, to the cultural sites, even the dog sled race.
Everything.
Yeah, and the whole itinerary was basically boiled down to a one-day visit to the U.S. Space Force base at Pituffik on March 28th.
And Prime Minister Reds was still not happy, especially about National Security Advisor Waltz coming along. He said it was a demonstration of power.
Well, yeah, if you're already feeling the pressure.
Exactly. And the White House advanced security team that had arrived actually left.
They just packed up and left?
Packed up and left. They'd come with all this equipment and, armored vehicles and everything.
Just to kind of put this in perspective, what do you think was going on there? What do you think their original plan was?
I mean, it seems like they were prepared for some sort of major diplomatic push, maybe even anticipating some protests or resistance. Who knows what they were thinking?
Yeah, it's a little unsettling.
Yeah, for sure. So J.D. Vance ended up saying that the visit to Pituffik was just to get a briefing on Arctic security and to meet with U.S. service members.
He also said the U.S. has ignored Greenland for far too long.
Interesting.
So we have this visit that went from cultural exchange to military base visit, and a lot of very strong reactions from Greenland and Denmark.
Yeah. So what struck you about the nature of those reactions?
A lot of anger, a lot of frustration. It seems like they felt very provoked by all of this. Prime Minister Azad said that the new American leadership is completely and utterly indifferent and focused on taking over our country over our heads. He said, "Greenland belongs to the Greenlanders. We cannot be bought and we cannot be ignored."
Really strong words.
Yeah.
I mean, he seems genuinely angry.
Yeah, and it wasn't just him. The chairman of the Democratic Party, Jens Frederick Nielsen, said that the planned visit showed a lack of respect. And Greenlandic journalist Masana Igrid said that a lot of people still saw the visit as a provocation even after it was scaled back.
Did they talk about any kind of specific actions like protests or demonstrations or anything like that?
Yeah, there were reports of planned protests, people talking about turning their backs on the second lady if she had gone to the dog sled race. And then there was a survey that showed 85% of Greenlanders are against a U.S. takeover.
That's a pretty clear message.
Yeah, and the Greenlandic government really emphasized that they did not extend an official invitation for this visit, particularly since they were in the middle of forming a new coalition government.
Sensitive time.
Very. And Denmark's reaction was a little bit different. Prime Minister Frederiksen said that the pressure was unacceptable, but Foreign Minister Rasmussen said he had a very positive view of the scaled-back visit and that he had no objections to the visit to Pituffik.
So they're okay with the military base visit, but not the other stuff.
It seems that way, yeah. And Danish Defense Minister Poulsen even said that scaling back the visit was wise. And an opposition lawmaker said that Denmark has always been open to a larger U.S. military presence if it's requested. So it seems like they're okay with the U.S. being there as long as it's, within the existing agreements. And it doesn't seem like there's some other agenda.
It's interesting how the Danish government seems to be walking this tightrope.
Well, yeah, they have to balance their relationship with the U.S. with their responsibility to Greenland.
Right, and their own interest in the Arctic.
Yeah, and we saw some interesting analysis from experts, too. Ulrik Pram Gad said that Trump's approach comes across as dominance to Greenlanders and that his attempts at soft diplomacy seem to have failed.
Not a good look.
No, and Martin Brown made a good point. He said that Greenlanders are open to business opportunities, but they don't want a political takeover.
And how do you think that squares with all the reports of the cold shoulder that U.S. officials got when they were trying to arrange those visits?
I think it just reinforces that Greenlanders are not interested in being told what to do. They want to be partners, not subjects, and Aja Chemnitz, who is the Greenlandic member of the Danish parliament, said that the U.S. wasn't showing respect for Greenland's right to self-determination. So it seems like there's this real disconnect between how the U.S. sees its actions and how they are being perceived by the people in Greenland.
That's a dangerous disconnect.
Absolutely. So let's talk about why the U.S. is doing this. What are their motivations?
Well, the big one is security.
Right. Greenland's location in the Arctic is really important strategically.
The Arctic is becoming a hot spot geopolitically.
Yeah, and the Pituffik Space Base is already a key part of the U.S. missile defense system. Some are even talking about it being part of a future Golden Dome defense architecture. And then there's the whole issue of Arctic dominance and controlling those shipping lanes as the ice melts.
Which Russia and China are also paying a lot of attention to.
Exactly. And Trump himself has talked about how important it is for the U.S. to secure Greenland for security reasons.
So it's about controlling the Arctic.
Yeah, but it's not just about security. There's also the economic side of things.
Yeah, Greenland has all those untapped reserves of rare earth minerals.
Like cobalt, nickel, copper, lithium, zirconium, things that are really important for a lot of modern technologies and defense industries.
And the U.S. is heavily reliant on China for those resources right now.
Right, so they're looking for ways to diversify their supply chain, and Greenland could be a big part of that. And then there's the potential for oil and gas.
Yeah, we can't forget about that.
But interestingly, some Greenlanders see an opportunity for economic growth through American investment.
But not through a takeover.
Exactly. It's a very fine line.
And then there's this historical context that Thomas Yeager talked about. President Trump wanting to leave his mark, expand U.S. territory like some presidents before him.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't say that out loud, but it's an interesting point.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the role of history in all of this.
Definitely. So there's been this controversy about the invitation that the U.S. delegation supposedly had.
Yeah, President Trump said they were invited, but Greenland says no official invitation was ever extended.
So what's the deal with that?
Well, Tom Dans from American Daybreak, he invited the second lady to the dog sled race. His organization was sponsoring the event, but both Greenland and Denmark said that was a personal invitation, not an official government invitation.
So President Trump was being a bit misleading.
Well, he wasn't exactly lying, but it's definitely a stretch to say that was a formal invitation for a high-level diplomatic visit.
Yeah, that's quite a spin.
So I guess we've covered a lot here. It's been a wild couple of weeks.
It really has. And I think the main takeaway is that the U.S. is really pushing hard to gain influence over Greenland for a whole bunch of reasons. And that's not sitting well with the people of Greenland or with Denmark.
And the way the U.S. is going about this is causing some serious problems.
Yeah, Trump's approach seems to be creating more tension than anything else.
And this could actually fuel the movement for independence in Greenland.
It's definitely a possibility. If they feel like they're being pressured and disrespected, they might be even more determined to go their own way.
Right. And the disconnect between how the U.S. sees its actions and how those actions are perceived in Greenland,
Yeah.
that's a major issue that needs to be addressed.
For sure. So we've covered the elections, the statements, the visit, the reactions, the motivations, the invitation controversies, all the different pieces of this puzzle.
Yeah. A lot of information, but hopefully it's starting to make more sense.
I think so. And
Yeah.
so now the big question is, what happens next?
Yeah, what happens next? I mean, Greenland wants independence. The Arctic is becoming more and more important. Strategically, the U.S. wants to be in control, and there's a lot of tension between all these different players. So how is all of this going to play out?
Yeah. What role will the people of Greenland ultimately have in determining their own future?
A lot of big questions and no easy answers.
Definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into this very complex and rapidly changing situation. It's definitely given us a much clearer understanding of what's going on.
Absolutely. Always good to dig deep into these things.
Well, thanks again, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive into something else that's going on in the world.
Until next time.